Welcome to Inside the Directors Circle and this episode on B2B selling in professional services. I'm Jason Langford-Brown, your host, founder of the Directors Circle and practicing business advisor and coaching psychologist. In this episode, we're actually going to share with you a recent podcast we did with our partners at TGS Global. Here you'll hear me being interviewed by Andrew Menzies, Vice President of the TGS Global Network. You'll find this episode really useful if you're either a professional services firm or in the business of B2B selling. Before you listen to this episode, just remember this is just a snapshot of what happens within our business leader community. So if you want to get more involved or access further insights, visit directors-circle.com.
Hi, well, welcome to TGS Talks. Today we're talking to Jason Langford-Brown. Jason, we met you in Mind Shop. We've seen you for years and years as we participate in the Mind Shop to help develop our advisory skills. So it's only right that you're the guinea pig for TGS Talks. You're the first one of this new series of podcasts.
Now I'm under pressure.
No pressure. In fact, it's good. I hope we fail so that we can find the ways to make this better. But at least the technology is slightly new, so we should be getting better quality. So I introduced you very badly. Maybe you could give me a bit of a rundown of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I suppose simplistically, I'm a business advisor and a coaching psychologist. So that's quite an interesting blend, I suppose. So I come with that practical approach to advising businesses, but with a psychological edge, which I suppose when I sort of talk about what I do in a bit more detail, ultimately we're charged with helping people get to the next level performance, as we put it. And kind of what does that mean? Because that's a bit of a bland statement. What it means in practice is we work at organisational level, team level, and at individual level. And what we're looking to do is unlock potential. I think what we find is that most things that most people or organisations or teams want to do are very, very within their gift. Unlocking that potential to make it happen and enable them to get out of their own way, drive the behavioural change. The organisational change is obviously what really needs to happen. So that ultimately is what we're all about: is how do we get that organisational change, how do we get that behavioural change, so that people can sort of unlock that potential and get to where they want to get to.
That's super interesting, and I think that's what we had really liked about your approach when we met you in Mind Shop, is that for the TGS network, that's exactly what we try to do, because I think your mix of psychology and actual coaching technologies, if you call it that, it's what people need, because we have the network and people think, I can join a network, it will bring me X amount of business, and in fact it doesn't work like that, because that's not a goal and there's no input, and there's a lot of ways we block ourselves and the members block themselves from actually getting it. So that's why we're happy to work with people like you. So just in terms of Mind Shop and then Lucid, your firm just now, how did you get to where you are?
So I suppose Lucid, was part of my transition in many ways. So I'm not a career consultant. I'm not an ex-therapist, nor am I a trainer. So all the things I suppose that lots of people that do what I do come from. I actually came from industry. So I worked, had a real job. My last job, I was a board director of a FTSE 250 company. So I had a 25-year corporate experience, really, that started, which is probably why my subject is what it is at the conference, but started in sales and marketing. So that was my profession, if you like, but then moved through leadership roles, ended up running companies. And I was quite fortunate that I wasn't pigeonholed in industry. Many people work in one industry their whole career. I worked in lots of different industries. I worked in financial services, I worked in creative, I worked in manufacturing and print. So a really varied career, which was super interesting for me. And I suppose what defined me really was I was really good at transformational growth, turnaround, fixing businesses. So when you kind of pull all that together, along with my kind of real interest in leadership and psychology while I was in the corporate world, once I'd had enough of the corporate environment, sort of leaving and setting up my own firm kind of made a lot of sense. And early when I came out in 2008, 2009, so just when we had a massive global crisis, which was in hindsight not a great business move, but I very quickly got drawn into the world of turnaround because there's a lot of people obviously in a lot of difficult places then. But I was really trying to form my firm at the time and join Mind Shop, and so really for me the rest is history. They really helped me really shape my advisory model.
And that's what a lot of the members, again, I think that's the affinity we had seen before we thought about inviting you to our conference, was that the members of our members, the firm, the managing partners of our member firms, this is difficult, I've not had enough tea yet today, but they've come out of that kind of corporate environment of the big often, and they've seen how they want to do it better. So that was a real parallel with your career, and it's, but they need help, which is why we've got you coming to Dubai, and you're going to be talking about sales. Everything has changed, and nothing has changed. So what's your goal for that? What do you mean?
Not to bore people for 2 hours is probably the first goal, but that's fine. I think we can cope with that. No, I think the key things for me is in selling. There's been there's a history of sales that I may share briefly at the conference, but sales hasn't changed hugely over the last 150 years, which is probably the timescale of selling really in its professional guise. And there's been 3 or 4 seismic shifts through that time, and we've just had one. So there's a very different landscape now to selling in the modern world. So my first goal is really, I think, maybe to make people aware of that and what does that even mean. We talk. The good news is it's an evolution, but when we talk about this with our clients, it's one of those evolutions that if you don't, we basically say it's an evolution that's revolutionary, because if you don't embrace it, it's kind of, you're dead. So, it is an evolution, but it's almost got revolutionary impact if you don't embrace it. So goal 1, understand that. I think then what we'll probably do is spend a bit of time trying to help people understand what even does a high performing sales environment even look like, because again, I think people can't probably visualize that, and what all the component parts that, because it isn't just about getting a great person to go out and sell really well. That very rarely is the answer to achieving high performing sales. It is a whole environment that needs to be in place. So we'll definitely help people understand what all the component parts are. And I think then we want to get a bit practical, because we've got a couple of hours and we want to make it interactive. So we'll definitely talk about the kind of approaches to selling that work, particularly for managing partners and accountancy firms. What they should be offering into the future. We've got probably a 10-year forward vision. I know that you're talking about. I think people think of what does what we're selling in the next 10 years need to look like. So we'll touch on that and how to put that proposition together. And then I don't always like to spend a lot of time on the social side, because I think there's a lot of fluff around that. But I think we will touch on the whole social selling piece, and probably what I'm going to do on that is bust a bunch of myths, because there's a lot of noise around that they need to not listen to, but there are important parts of it that they can embrace in a more practical way. That's maybe a bit different to what LinkedIn are telling them. So yeah, we'll do some of that as well.
Yeah, when we worked with you in London, we were like, you were always at these conferences, people are under pressure for time. They say, "Oh, you've got 50 minutes, 55 minutes, hurry up!" And people are shouting at you from the sides, and we wanted to. We hate that, and we wanted to avoid it. So it's great that we've got this opportunity to dig a bit deeper and work together and really learn from your experience, because there was a lot of things. I was taking notes furiously, thinking, "Oh, that's going to be good for the members. Oh, yeah, that's great." Yeah. And I haven't dug into it at all, because I'm like everybody else, just focused on today's work rather than looking 10 years into the future. So this is a way to get them excited about it. So I was interested to know, what is B2B selling? And why should accountants and auditors and professional services in general be aware of that?
Yeah, I mean, B2B selling in itself is pretty simplistic. So, B2B is business to business. I mean, a lot of people probably understand that. And B2C is business to consumer. So it's just really a differentiation between, are you selling to consumers? Like, if you've got a shop selling clothes, if you've got a baker selling bread, or are you a business selling to other businesses? So it's not so much about what it is, because that's fairly straightforward. But I think it's, what B2B selling brings usually is a more complex, often higher value or higher impact sale. So that's really that's the bit that people need to get their head around. If I'm in B2B sales, which obviously any professional services firm is, and accountants are no different, I can't just set up my stall in the market and go, come and buy my bread, 2 for £1, or 2 for €1 or 2 for €1. It's a much more complex conversation, relationship and process to be successful in. So I think that's the bit we'll dig into that a bit in the session. But yeah, I think that's the thing. It's about, and that I mentioned there's been a big shift. some of the data, there's been lots of data sources over the last few years about the shift in selling, but one of the constant pieces of the data is the more complex the product you're selling, and whether we like it or not, and selling advisory is a complex sell, the more likely you are to fail if you don't embrace the new approaches. So very great. Serious, really important that people start to lock into that.
And it's not really something I think it's one of these things that you can easily avoid thinking about. And in fact, with a bit of thought, there's probably, and I like when you say, or I hear it when you say there's value involved. What's the kind of value which is for sale? I spoke to a firm recently who, like I said, oh yeah, how you doing? Networking sort of thing. Said, how you doing? Yeah, what do you do? And their first reaction was, it's a bit complicated, like in the sense of like I would never understand what they do. And I couldn't help but thinking, well, if that's your approach to your business, you haven't thought about it enough. You have to be able to explain what you do and what the value
absolutely
is.
Well, I mean, that is really, I mean, if you can't say in 3 or 4 words what it is you do, and what you do is in the context of the outcome for your customer, not in terms of the products you sell, you are, and how you're going to engage anybody to start with. But I think the other thing as well about in B2B selling is, this is just a bit of I suppose just there's so many things that we can talk about, but just the notion of stakeholders. So what you don't get in a B2C sale very often is a whole army of stakeholders that have a say in the decision. Now there's lots of numbers, but you're probably talking anywhere between 5 and as many as 12 people being involved in the B2B decision at your customer end. Now in the past, those stakeholders were there, but actually leaders would often go rogue and make a decision on their own. They don't do that anymore. So, you have this much more almost like stakeholder consensus requirement. Also, it's almost like buy-in by committee in a way. So again, it's, all that kind of stuff is, it's like that wasn't even on the radar 10 years ago. Suddenly now it's like I'm not selling to the MD. I've got to actually sell to the MD and the 7 or 8 stakeholders. I've got to get them all to I've got to engage them. I've got to get them to buy into what we're doing and then get them to agree that we're the right answer to that solution. That's on one level is really scary, but
yeah, I'm hearing a lot. You hear a lot. It's a lot of strategy and communication. So like it's not selling. It's a real strategic communication event, isn't it, over a long term?
And here's, I think, a bit that advisors and accountants included misses, that lots of really high-performing salespeople now are different to what they used to be. They're not that gregarious, outgoing, personality-based person. Often a lot of them now are analytical, introverted, critical thinkers. They're some of the most high-performing B2B salespeople on the planet now. So just let your members think about that for a while. That's a huge opportunity for accountants because they fit in that bracket.
So that makes me jump to another question. I was thinking, traditionally or stereotypically, we think accountants and auditors are really bad at selling their services because they've never had to in the past. Like, it's that notion of compliance. But now everyone says, well, I'm not just compliance. We sell value and advisory. But how come they're not good at doing it?
Yeah. Well, I think they do what I used to do as a young salesman. We talk about, we add value, but it was just talk. There wasn't really any real quantification behind it. And I have to say, in the 90s, I could go into a business and say we had lots of value, and people just believed you. Now they want you to prove it. So there's a shift in the world straight away. And I think accountants do that a lot. They talk about value, but they can't really quantify it to their. And I'm not saying they don't, but if you can't show how you deliver the value, then people are not just going to take it at face value. I think it's interesting for me when I talk to accountants. Their approach is they need to stop selling, and I mean that not because selling is a bad thing, because selling is a highly professional skill. But most accountants' perception of selling isn't that. It's almost like a underhand, immoral, dirty practice that we have to inflict on somebody, and they don't really want to. Doesn't fit with their moral compass. So with that frame in the mind, I'd say stop doing that, because that isn't selling. But start advising, because they advise all day long, and actually good salespeople actually advise people on how to make the right decision. So that's the approach. And when he's just to answer the question more directly, why are they so bad? Well, the perception of sales, which is obviously what I mentioned a second ago, they have the wrong perception of what selling is. There are parts of the world where selling is seen, alongside accountants, lawyers, because it's respected for the profession it is. They need to tap into that. They're definitely too internally focused. So you talked about the value piece, and they're more focused on what they do and the products they can sell rather than, you know, the value it gives to their customers. So the internalization of their approach is a big reason for their failure or their difficulty in selling. And I think another thing is just a practical thing. They just don't give it attention. It's just almost like an afterthought. And they're busy being accountants, and it's like, oh, but maybe we ought to do some selling at some point. Well, you know, anything you don't give time and attention to, you're going to struggle to do well. So they're probably the key things to me that maybe accountants get wrong.
Yeah, I think it's like I'm okay with the notion of sales and selling because like I get it. I mean, I view all the members of the network as being in business. So the business of business is business. And, right? So it's not a dirty word when I say it. And sometimes when I speak to people, I think Mark, particularly the president, if I write something which is about sales, he'll say, oh, don't call it sales. Call it, you know, business development. Or sustainability. Yeah, exactly that. But I mean, it's that. But it's like you've got to get more clients and do more good or however you do it. So you've got to do it.
It is a nonsense because, you know, every part of a business is really important, you know, and I don't just do sales, you know, I do leadership and other things, but the truth is nothing happens unless you sell something. So, you know, without sales there isn't a business. So yeah, we got to get, and it's interesting, you know, that just a quick story. Here in the UK we have a very highly respected organisation called the Chartered Institute of Marketing, which is where you go to study for marketing. You'll know as a Scot. And you know, when that organisation was founded over 100 years ago, it was called the Institute of Sales. It wasn't called, because actually marketing as a word didn't even exist. And things that what we now call marketing and sales were actually all under sales. And then somehow sales seems to have kind of just sullied itself over the last 100 years. Marketing has highly professionalized itself as a fragment of selling, you know. And we've got to get back to that highly professional discipline that always did exist, and almost flush out people that have the people that sell in that kind of way that we don't like and we find distasteful. They're not salespeople. They're just people that have abused it, really, and we need to get rid of them and get back to seeing it as a really valuable and important part of what we do.
I think going back to the Mindshop conference, so I was really inspired. I don't know what I read about one of the books that was mentioned, as I always you try to do, and that was the Authentic Happiness, where it runs down about the your strengths, your signature strengths, and how you should recraft your work to fit with your strengths. And I think that's it. Like for me, I don't see myself as a salesperson, although a lot of my work is sales. If I do that, but you know, I'm creating relationships and I'm learning stuff. So I reframe it to myself to make sure my day is fitting with the way I like to do it. Maybe that's a good. It's not a trick, but it's just a way to think about it.
Well, no, so I think you've hit on a really important point because, you know, with my psychology hat on, there is no personality for a salesperson. I can get the 20 most successful salespeople in the world lined up on a wall and they would all have very different personalities. So we all find ways to achieve the profession of sales, but from different points of reference. And that's actually how it does happen. You know, as I've already mentioned, lots of introverted people highly successful in sales now. You know, but if you ask people what an archetypal salesperson looked like, they would never describe that person as a salesperson. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff we carry in our mind about selling we just got to get rid of.
Yeah, that's good. That's really, really interesting. And there's a lot of traction in there because that's what they'll say, the stereotypical accountants and orders. They say, oh, I'm not sales, you know, and all that.
Yeah.
So in terms of that, so what do the best in practice accountants and auditors who are good at selling their services, what do they do?
Well, I've worked with a lot of professional services firms, accountants included, and the ones I've worked with, and when you look at the industry as a whole, what they do, and it isn't just accountants, I think it's any professional services, they create separation. So despite what I've just said, there are people that either want to or are built to be sales and customer people, and there are people that are very technical and operationally minded. And that may be as much about what they want to do as about what they could do, but that's fine. And I think the difference with, probably professional services versus other industries is we all come into the profession. So we all come in as accountants, as lawyers, as engineers, whatever it is. And what the highly successful firms do is they create a separation pathway that says, in this organization, we want to scale and grow. So at some point, you've got to make a choice about whether you go client side or whether you go operational side. And you can be both are equally valued, and you can be equally successful in both. But you have to go one way or the other, because if you try continue to be operational and sales, your efficiency is never going to be there. How do I flip from preparing a set of accounts to being a salesperson? So you see that in, you look at them. The big four are not always the best barometer for everything. But I was with an ex-partner of KPMG this week, and KPMG have always been hugely successful at saying, you're on the sales side now. They didn't call it sales, ironically, but on the sales side, you won't be delivering the work. You need to have had that basis of the profession so you can speak with confidence, and that's the key. You can't come in not from the profession, but once that's the journey you take. And ironically, KPMG as an example, most of their partners are client side. And so most of the money actually in KPMG is not earned on operational side, it's earned on client side. So it's interesting. And I've seen that on lots of different, that's a big scale example, but I've seen other smaller scale, more SME type accountancy firms where they've done similar things, and you see they get huge traction because they've got people now focused and dedicated to developing their customers, growing their customers and winning new customers.
It's a key word, isn't it? Focus. What do you want to focus on? What do you want to do? That's the thing. Yeah. So talking about focus, we're going to get into this sales, everything has changed and nothing has changed workshop in Dubai. So the members who are participating, what could they do in advance to prepare for the workshop?
Okay, so there's two things they can do. One is we're gonna pull together a bit of a sales diagnostic for them, which we'll send out probably a couple of weeks beforehand. If everyone can just take 5 or 10 minutes just to complete that, that will give them an interesting report on where they are against some key criteria around their own selling environment. So that's useful. But what I'll do is I'll aggregate those scores so I can share the results at the conference, and so we can see as a room kind of where the gaps are for the room, or where the differences are, where the similarities are. So that will be useful. And I think probably the next thing I'd say is really ask themselves, where do they want their firm to be in the next 3, 5 and 10 years as a whole? What does that look like? And then what are their top 3 challenges that are probably client and sales related? If they come having put some pre-thoughts of that, that'll give them an opportunity to really contextualize what we're going to talk about.
Well, that's pretty good, because that's the theme of the conference. So we're looking to the future. And what does your firm look like? And what does TGS, what does the network look like in the next 3, 5, 10 years? It's really key. Thanks, Jason. Yeah. That's fantastic. And one last thing, I appreciate I'm taking up all your afternoon, but have you got one piece of advice that the members could put into action that would make them a better seller this week?
This week, okay.
Or next week. No, this week. Let's go for it.
Let's go with this week. Let's go within the next 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So you know what? I'm going to share a piece of advice. I was very fortunate to meet a lady during COVID, obviously on Zoom, from New Zealand, who is probably the best salesperson I've met in the last 25 years. And we interviewed her, and the first answer to the first question we asked her resonated with me so much, and I still use it in every single session I run on sales. And we basically said to her, what was the secret of your success or something? It wasn't that, but it was something like that. And she said, everything changed for me. She said, I wasn't always a great salesperson. And I probably have to qualify that she only needs to work 3 days a week now. And her client list reads Disney, Coca-Cola, it's like the biggest brands in the world. And she said, I wasn't always a great salesperson, but everything changed for me the day I fell in love with the client's problems, not my solutions. And when you start to think about that, it changes everything. Because suddenly now she goes into a customer and all she's concerned with is understanding what's their problems, what are their challenges, what's happening for them, what they're trying to solve. Not concerning herself at all whether or not even she can help them. But of course, what happens when you do that is you really get, two things. You get huge rapport and empathy with your customer. They think you care. And inevitably she trusts the fact that there will be things that they're struggling with that she can help them with. She doesn't worry about that at the beginning. So that fall in love with your client's problems, not your solutions, is probably something that could really change people's mindset very, very quickly.
I like the sound of that, and I'm gonna chew on that as I'm editing this podcast, and I'll see if I can put it into action. Jason Langford-Brown, thank you so much for coming to join us on TGS Talks. And I'm really looking forward to catching up with you and Steph in Dubai. It's going to be really great.
It's going to be fun. Thanks, Andrew.
We hope you found this episode useful. In our next episode, we'll be focusing in on strategy and really getting down into what really makes visions and missions useful and helpful in developing and implementing strategy. And we'll be joined by our global strategist, Mike Burke from the Burke Advisory Group. In the meantime, though, thank you for listening to Inside the Director's Circle.